because your body's been worn down and depleted, and a lot of your natural joy has been kind of burned up in
Yeah.
the kind of, not only in neurological terms, but hormonally and physically, you're kind of wasted down. And so your ability to have a connection, to a natural connection, that has been compromised. And so it takes a while to just come out of that. And then you're like, oh, well, of course,
Yeah.
right? This is
Stories are powerful. Welcome to the Rise, Recover, Live podcast, brought to you by The Phoenix. This is a space where people impacted by substance use can come to share their story of strength and resilience, get open and honest, and inspire hope and build community through shared experience.
We'll be talking to people in our community on their own recovery journey and shine a light on the topic of recovery in all its forms. Maybe you'll hear some of your story in theirs.
Let's show the world that together we rise, recover, and live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rise, Recover, Live, the podcast. I am your host, Bryce III.
I am your other host, Liz McKean.
And today we have a very special guest, someone who is, I think, going to be a catalyst to a lot of metaphors today. And so I'm going to go ahead and let Liz give him a proper introduction before we can just dive right in.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm honored to do that. And I will second that. We're big fans of the metaphors. If you're new here, then welcome to the land of metaphors. It's our favorite thing. And Thad's going to have a lot of great ones for us. So Thad Ziolkowski, and I am so sorry if I'm saying that name right. I'm going to let you repronounce it for me in a moment. Did I get it right? Oh my God, that is a good sign. I was trying to figure out how to maybe say just little parts of your bio and your background to introduce you, to be brief, but I'm like, I want to say every single thing because I'm pumped about it. So buckle up, because this is a pretty cool person that we've got on our podcast today. That is the author of Our Son the Arson, a collection of poems, the memoir On a Wave, which was a finalist in the Penn Martha Albrandt Award in 2003, and Wichita, a novel. So that is 3 books, my friends. His most recent book, The Drop, number 4, which explores the relationship between surfing and addiction, was published by HarperCollins in 2021. His essays and reviews have appeared in the New York Times, Slate, Book Forum, Art Forum, Travel and Leisure, Interview Magazine, and Index. He's a recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and has a PhD in English Literature from Yale University. And I am just overwhelmed with gratitude that he decided to take some time to chat with us today. So welcome, Thad. Thank you so much for being here.
great to be here. Thank you.
How is your energy today?
I feel all right. I feel it's been a while since I talked about this book, but so I'm just trying to kind of reorient myself toward it. And yeah.
Okay. Well, and so also, however it is that you show up today is exactly what we're here to support. A lot of times, even though, there's the content of the book, the person who created the book is you, and you're here. And so whatever it is that you contribute to the space today, that's exactly what we look forward to. So first of all these accolades and all of these publications, we are in the presence of a damn celebrity. So first of all, I just want to point that out, that this is an honor and a privilege to have you on the show today. And secondly, man, the creative process, 4 books. I'm a newly published author, and I know how much energy goes into that creativity. So tell us a bit about the process of creativity for you and getting these things out into the world.
Well, I've always been kind of a slow writer, so for me, it's really a lot about revision. And I've always been convinced that the difference between writers and non-writers is, for writers, writing's kind of more of a problem. Writers tend to see writing as unnatural and difficult, and that makes it something of you have to have a real intense connection to linguistic expression, even just to go through all the revision, all the work that you need to do to get it right for the page. It's so unnatural in a lot of ways. And I think non-writers tend to think of writing as very fluid and kind of pouring out on the page. But most writers do not write that way. They don't experience writing that way, except in the sense of maybe a really special first draft of a poem or a song. Like poetry can be a little more liable to be great on a first draft, but even poetry tends to take a lot of revision. So for me, writing is like a lot about just coming up with a focus that's going to sustain all the time and work that goes into making it good, making it worth someone picking up to read. So, like for me, this last book on surfing and addiction, it had really strong connections for me autobiographically. So I was just so excited to have those topics to really dig into. And I felt it was, even though it was very dark material in a lot of ways, I was so connected to it that I feel like I could just write in that vein endlessly. Like I feel like that, even though I realize it may bore other people to hear about surfing and surfing and surfing. For me, I could just write about surfing and addiction and drugs and, all of that forever. So a lot of it is like, if you can kind of focus on something that you're really passionate about, then you'll get through the work of revision and so forth to make it worth reading.
Yeah. So let's just dive right in to, because somebody this is my first time meeting you and really my first time hearing of you and hearing of this surfing and addiction analogy. Tell us a bit about your story. How did you begin surfing? What is your background in recovery? Like how did all this come together?
Well, when I was a boy, I was raised in the South, like in North Carolina, and my father was from Alabama, and he used to take me out in the woods, and we would hunt for snakes. It was a real Huck Finn kind of thing, and I had this really intense early connection to the wilderness and woods, and just the quiet of it, and hunting in this really quiet way, and oftentimes not even finding anything. We would look for snakes, and snakes are very hard to catch, actually, unless you're in a swamp. I mean, hard to even see because they hear you coming, and we would be making more noise than we realized. And so that early experience of the woods in the South was really formative for me, and a sense of poetry and of connection to wilderness and to spirituality. And then my father, who was a professor of classics, he got a job in D.C. And so we moved to the big city, and we lived in the city in the late 60s. And it was just a completely different time of, like my life was like a museum kid, and I became kind of a nerdy, bookish city boy. And at that point, my parents divorced. My mother remarried a man, and they moved. And this guy she remarried got a job in Florida. So we moved south to Florida. I thought, oh, great, I'm going to be able to find all the snakes, and it'll be like in the Everglades, and I'll just be able to renew this connection I have to the woods. And I was so excited. And we get down there, we're on the beach, and I'm finding some anole lizards, and I'm catching like a box turtle or a gopher turtle. And then I look out and I'm like, oh my God, they're surfing. And everyone's going to the beach to go surfing. And I'm like, oh. And so I just kind of dropped this whole thing about snakes and reptiles and art and museums. And I become completely immersed in the surf world, which had this element of wilderness, and it had this element of danger, like snake hunting had. And it just really, really held me at this level of the immersiveness of it. And I also really felt quite alienated from my family by then, because I didn't like this stepfather who had brought me to Florida. That was the good news. The bad news was he was a bit of an alcoholic, white knuckle alcoholic. He had quit drinking, but he had a lot of anger and a lot of unhappiness just generally. And surfing was for me a real escape from him, and from my house, and from my thoughts about who and what had happened to my family. And I was able to completely just forget. It was like the magic experience. The way that the woods had absorbed me when I was younger, the ocean and surfing completely absorbed me, and I forgot everything, and I just became obsessed with it. because it had that magic power of oblivion and joy, and so
So
that's
let me
what
ask you. Let me ask you this: what did you do with the snakes when you caught them?
I was hoping you'd ask that.
I would put them in a cage and try and keep them,
Oh, they're so interesting.
Yeah,
I was like, man, are people
them
eating
to be
snakes?
pets. I was too young
I've had
to.
snake.
Yeah. Oh, what kind?
Wow.
I forgot what snake it was that I ate. So I ate some snake before.
Oh, I see.
Coming up, I would always catch like garter snakes and just keep them around, and I would always name them Victoria. I don't know why they would all be named Vicky, and so
Uh-huh.
like I have a curly haired tarantula, and her name is Samantha Victoria Cobb, just in
I feel
remembrance
like
of all of the
Bryce
snakes.
just called me right before we started recording, called me a psychopath for the way I eat Sour Patch Kids. So I'm just going to go ahead and just not take that personally at all based on this new revelation.
Everybody has psychopathy in their own way.
Oh, it's so
Well,
true.
it's interesting that you're interested in snakes and tarantulas, because one of the things that, about snakes and these things that are kind of creepy is that if you overcome, there's a kind of attraction to them because everyone else is freaked out by them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I was a boy, I think at some level the appeal of snakes, just like later the appeal of surfing, was that other people were, whoa, I don't want to drown. I don't want to be bit by a snake. What in the hell are you doing, boy? Out in the woods chasing snakes? That's crazy. You're going to get bit. And to overcome the kind of fear and aversion of the tribe, and to go against the grain of what the tribe thought was dangerous, was a part of the appeal, almost like a perverse appeal.
Mm.
Don't you find with your tarantula and your snake? Do you ever think of it that way, Bryce?
So actually, my tarantula was exactly that, but not because other people were scared, but because I was scared. So especially like when I first entered into recovery, like I was taught very early on to practice the opposite of what I used to do, and that would help lead me to a different life. And so I got a little bit more spiritual just from kind of my research and what it is that I preferred and what resonated with my spirit. And, I started like respecting life at a different level. And instead of, I would still be freaked out by spiders but everybody would call me in the room to like kill the spiders. Like, come kill the spiders, it's scary. And I just started like leaving them alone. And then eventually that moved to like maybe trying to get them in a cup. And then that moved to, okay, now I'm catching them by the spider web. Then that moved to like, come here, get on my hand. And then even letting them come on your hand, like you've developed a different relationship. Because if you try to catch a spider, you'll notice they don't even want anything to do with you. It's like, oh, you're about as freaked out about me as I'm freaked out about you. And then so, this continuing developing, like practicing the opposite and developing a new relationship with my surroundings and the context of which I fit into my surroundings led to us like, what could be the next step? I was like, we got to get the craziest spider in the world. And that's what I did. So, and now looking at her every day and like having had her for like 3 years, it just has developed. I've developed this like, kind of endearing, like, I really like spiders, like, I take care of a spider,
Right. Yeah. It's kind of the appeal of going against the grain of your initial aversion or your initial fear. Yeah. To get over that.
I mean, I think we have our
surfing. I went through every time I go surfing, I have to get over an initial fear of going in the water, even though I've done it all my life now. The other day I went out and I was the first one to paddle out, and I was like, this isn't where you're supposed to be, really. We're not built for the water, even though we come from the water. And that sense of overcoming that initial revulsion is part of the appeal of it too. It's like, it's difficult. And
you keep saying things, Liz, I know you want to pop in, but you keep saying things that make me want to dig deep. So what do you mean by we come from the water?
We come from the water evolutionarily. Like we're aquatic originally, like in terms of just if you accept the theory of evolution, all life emerged from the ocean. The ocean is the mother of creaturehood. All creatures, all forms of life emerged from the ocean. And so when you go back to the ocean, you feel a kind of home. It feels like home to me. It feels like, and this is the one theory of the ocean, of wilderness in general, is that we come from the wilderness. We're all from the forest and the tundra and the ocean. And when we go back and we're among all those other species, we feel most at home. That's called biophilia. We love life at the level of species. And so when I'm surfing, I know part of it has to do with feeling at home among all the species I can't even see, but I feel around me. That's the same appeal of the wilderness, the woods. I am out there again, as opposed to being in the city and built environments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I even feel that in the city, though, that, as you were saying that, I was thinking that's how I feel in the city. That's one of the reasons that I feel so at home in a city and in a, building full of people, but not people that I know very well. Like, I want to be, know that there's people around. I want to hear the noise. I want to like feel the vibration of life around me, but I don't want anybody to necessarily knock on my door, so it's something about that. There's just comfort in that for me. And I think it's similar, and I similarly feel really comfortable in nature, but, yeah, it is. It's just that life, just knowing that there's life happening around you, but still being able to be in your little bubble and
The
being able to
hive.
be, safe within that is cool.
It's
No, go ahead, Bryce.
No, I was just gonna add a little piece. I think like that was one of you and I's first connecting conversations, Liz, was when we was in Vegas and I went to the Mojave Desert, and like I had that experience of like uncontrollable tears on my way to the mountains, and I seen the mountains, and I kind of expressed to you like my experience, and it was just like, because I remember you mirroring back what I said, is that I like to be around stuff that's bigger than me. It makes me feel small in a good way, and way. Like that community or like community with nature. Like it's a continuing, evolving relationship that I've been cultivating since I began living intentionally. And I think maybe because of the experience that I've had with other humans, where like I don't even have to talk to another human, but I could just stand near them or know that they're within my proximity, and I feel like a sense of community. Maybe that's the same with the lizards and all the other species within the mountains that I'm not usually exposed to, because I'm from Detroit, where the Great Lakes are. And this is a different type of community. So that's definitely interesting way of looking at it.
So the thing about awe that's great and being in nature and feeling that good smallness has been taken up by addiction studies to counter, as a kind of countervailing force against the addiction syndrome of being so big as an ego, and like my needs for cocaine, my needs for alcohol are eclipsing everything else, and I'm huge in a kind of appetite and a kind of consuming way. I'm big. My consuming ego, my needs as an addict dominate and eclipse all else. And the opposite of that in terms of this theory is that in the wilderness, you feel small, but you feel an integrated smallness and a kind of connection, but your actual scale, your relationship to the rest of the world is one of integration, but also a kind of true smallness, like child of God kind of smallness. And that is something I think a lot of addicts in recovery, or addicts in general, can benefit, is just getting out of wilderness and feeling that. And that's one of the appeals. That's one of the fundamental appeals of surfing for me.
I just want to speak on just an experience that I've had recently that I've noticed, is that, especially working from home and being in the home and like working on my business and having a whiteboard and like really like sitting and reading and just really getting caught up in like self-actualization. Sometimes it could get to the point where I feel like the walls are like, and it's just, I don't know. And I just am like, I'm tired of myself, and but as soon as I walk outside and I see some leaves and I feel like the breeze, or I hop on my bike and go for a ride, it's like, like, like it's not even that deep.
Not even that deep. Yeah. It makes those big things feel smaller, but in a good way. And also like everything's just working the way it's supposed to, because you don't actually have any control over it at all. That I'm curious, you had said before that, when you were younger and you were in Florida and you were getting on the surfboard, that there was that feeling of just like kind of obliteration, like that void that you were, craving, for lack of a better word, and maybe the perfect word. But it sounds like that was pre-addiction for you. Is that right? Yeah. So how did that story go? Because I'm just wondering if there was overlap, or if that took over the obliteration piece and then you got back to surfing, or just, I would love to hear.
Yeah. So surfing in that way was like, in a one way, it kind of prepared the ground for addiction. It was itself kind of addictive, and it had the power to make everything else seem kind of minor. And it dominated my life for a number of years, to a problematic extent. Like, when I came to Florida, I read. And when I started surfing, everything, all the kind of cultural things that I used to do fell to the wayside. And there was also a lot of drugs in and around surfing in the 70s, and there still are. There was pot on the beach, and there was psychedelics, and then there was also some speed, and all of this was in the air and around. And I got into trying drugs really early. So I had a really powerful, kind of overwhelming bad trip experience just on pot at age 11. I drank some at age 11, 12, and that pot experience scared me so much so that I backed off of it, actually. So for a long time, when all my friends were getting harder into drugs and psychedelics and all that during high school, I was like straight edge, because I had gotten so shaken by that early experience of pot. So that when I finally got into alcohol and drugs in a problematic way, it was much later. But that was through the arts. That was kind of like through the whole mythology of intoxication and poetry and writing and painting and city life. And I had stopped surfing by the time I got into addiction for real. I had put surfing aside in order to become educated and to get a college degree and to lead a completely different life again. I had gone back to DC to study with my father. And, I thought surfing was completely behind me. And during those years, I acquired an alcohol and cocaine and amphetamine addiction. And I was completely caught up in that until I started surfing again. And surfing again in my mid-30s in the city, in New York City, was the beginning of how I got out of addiction. And what made surfing capable of doing that for me was that it had a power similar to drugs and alcohol. Yeah. It had that obliterative power that I knew could be a problem in its own right, but it was better than drugs and alcohol. It also got me fit again. I quit smoking. I got fit. I had stopped paying attention to my body, and I had a reason to be strong, and I had a reason to get out of bed, and I started to reorient myself to surfing. But it didn't happen overnight. It happened, like, I would say I didn't get straight up have that kind of come to Jesus moment until like 6 years later. So I started surfing again when I was 36, and it wasn't until I was 42, 43 that I had this really powerful, you've got to quit, where I had to do this sort of psychic surgery on myself. And it wasn't through AA. It was no recovery, nothing. I did it on my own, like someone like cutting off his hand because it was infected. You know what I'm saying? Like as if I were out in the wilderness, I was just like sawing off a limb or whatever.
Psychic surgery. Is that, did you coin that phrase, or is that something that's
psychic surgery was this thing in the 70s that happened down in Brazil, where there were these kind of cultic situations where someone would be shown reaching into another person on the table with no anesthesia and pull out the tumor or pull out. And it would seem like a hoax. But for a while it definitely left a mark on me as this thing. And when I got sober at 43, I lay back on the bed. I had hurt myself. I had fallen when I was drunk, and I was really freaked out by that. The next morning when I saw this big kind of bruise and contusion on my side, and I thought, you're going to kill yourself, like you're full on, you're going to die. And so I thought, I've got to stop. And so I lay back on the bed, and I kind of reached into myself, and this is what it felt like psychic surgery about it. I reached into myself through the selfhood that had become convinced that he absolutely deserved and needed the cushion of drugs and alcohol. Like, I was sensitive, and I couldn't live without it, really. I don't know about other people, but I couldn't do it. And once I kind of cut beneath that level to an earlier version of myself, I felt like I shifted this thing permanently. And I sat up, and I kind of was like, it was over. And I felt like from then on, I was basically done. I had one relapse about 10 years, 12 years later. And then I got back on track. But that one experience of having to lie down and do it to myself was the key. But I think it was built up to by surfing. Like, I had something I could turn to aside from pure sobriety. Because when I had tried to quit earlier, and before I was a surfer again, there was nothing to compensate me. Like, what? Like, quit and then what?
Yeah. Surfing was your harm reduction.
Yeah, exactly. Surfing was my harm reduction. That's a great way to put it.
How did that change your relationship with surfing? Did surfing become any different to you, or did you still approach it in the same kind of addictive way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had a moment where my brother moved to Kauai, and I was living in Manhattan in this tiny apartment, and he was this hippie kid who had moved there with his hippie friends, and they were surfing. And I thought, like, what the hell am I doing in New York? I've got to get the hell out. But I had a job. I had health care. I had, worked for a PhD. I couldn't. But it was one of those moments where I thought, this is just like a drug. Like, I was about to throw everything over and go for Hawaii in my mid-30s, and I was able to dial it back. And that was the difference between a full-on drug relationship. But in terms of my actual relationship to surfing, when I started it post-addiction, or as an adult, as an addict, was different. And I was much more aware of surfing's sort of dark side, and like how it could derail my life.
Well, it sounds like you were so much more aware of your dark side, I guess. Like, it was that psychic surgery was also just like this, you did more than take something out, like there's just this deep kind of understanding that you came to with yourself. Like, that's so cool. I've never heard that before.
But the reason I think surfing worked, and this is what I try sometimes as a kind of thought exercise to translate for other people who don't surf, is the reason I think it could work for me is because it connected me to a sort of boyhood joy, but also to an activity that had addictive capacity. It was a comparable power. It wasn't as powerful as full-on, hard drugs, but it was on the spectrum. It was like halfway. Like, so if you take the most destructive drug, like you can imagine, for me, it would be like methamphetamine. You go all the way over to that side of the spectrum. Surfing is like halfway. It's like a 5 out of a 10. And because it was a 5, it came close enough it had the power to keep my attention as an addict. You see.
Yeah.
And for people who don't live near the water, or who don't want to surf, or don't have any interest in surfing, or don't have any capacity for it, or they have no time for it, like, what about them? And I think the key thing is wilderness. And it's also sort of some kind of body, like adrenaline thing, like some kind of rush you get from mountain bikes or walking in the woods or running or whatever.
I mean,
what's drama?
For me, it was music. Music for a long time was like the closest thing that I had to God. And it was like this experience that was very divine. And having had that experience, like, without drugs and alcohol, maybe even more so than I did with drugs and alcohol, I was like, oh, we're onto something here. You know,
Right.
so I continue to this day, like I continue to dig in and kind of just like mess with the muses and stuff like that. And there's this term that I came across. I forgot where I read it at or heard about it, and it's called spontaneous conversion experiences, or like spontaneous spiritual awakenings. And from anybody that has like made that shift and like began to live a different life, there's usually like a big one of those, or like little tiny ones of those that begin that 180 shift from the ways that we used to live to how we live now. And a lot of times they include like desperation, and they include like putting something in that hole that we left open by switching up what it is that we were doing. And I wonder if like there's like a research study being done on like people's like conversion experiences from like one life to the other life, to see the commonalities between them all. Because I'll notice when people share their story, like there's always that point, and it's like that, and then it begins to be a different story. It's like, oh, it was that moment or those little tiny moments leading to that shifted that person's mindset, which allowed for them to like because I'm reading something now too called the outward mindset. I stay digging in everything, but like it's like we can tend to try to change the behavior. Okay, I won't do this, or I'll do this every other weekend, or I'll do this instead of this. But like that has a less of an opportunity to have a lasting effect unless we change the mindset. But when we change mindset, like inevitably behavioral change follows. So it's like these spontaneous conversion experiences, or these spontaneous religious experiences, spiritual experiences, those shift the mindset, which allows for the behavior to shift and it become lasting change, which I think is absolutely like, what is the word? Like I'm intrigued for real.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think so much of what you've said that makes me think of like the, I said just before Bryce was talking that it's drama for me. I feel like we get, I don't know if it's before or during, but there's an addiction to the drama, the danger, even the scare, even, the getting in trouble, doing the sneaking the drink or whatever, that even though you're living in a nightmare, it's still just like your comfort level of like, having this chaos of your life. And it's almost like we need to find an area where we can scratch that itch in a way that's going to be, safe, and also, or safe-ish, and also in a way that's going to add to our lives instead of take away from it. I know, Bryce, you and I have talked about this, about like all of a sudden that moment where you're like content and you're like, this doesn't feel comfortable at all, because you're just not used to that, or used to not. And it's almost like, and sometimes, I don't know about you, but I could start a fight with my husband, or just like do something like that that's just like, why am I even doing this? And it's because I'm trying to like recalibrate to that level of chaos that part of me still craves.
And you think about surfing, like I think there is like some
and there's
chaotic, because the fact that you compared like surfing to methamphetamine, you know, and even like music for me, like it intrigues me to like write something that is like so far off from what it is that I hear, or like, I'm gonna push these boundaries, or like, when I perform, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna like try to like scare people, and I'm gonna try to be like polarizing when I do this and do that. It's like living on that edge that gives me that adrenaline rush that I really appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many ways to get that edge back through risk that has nothing to do with drugs and alcohol. Like there are a million ways to risk, and the rush is just as intense. And I mean, like you were saying, Bryce, about your experiences of music, high or not high, that your capacity to appreciate subtlety and all of the nuances, and also even the kind of really intense rhapsodic thing that you feel on music, is higher when you're straight than it is when you're high. In a lot of ways, there's like all this availability of all the dimensions of your consciousness to that experience, in a way that the kind of narrowing effect of a high prevents. Even though it feels intense and it's got that pedal to the metal feeling, there's still a kind of there's a kind of loss you have on the narrowness of your appreciation for things. But the music is really interesting, Bryce, because also it involves the body, and you get yourself dancing with your headphones on in a room alone, and you can have incredibly ecstatic experiences that are completely full-bodied, but they're also spiritual. They're also, what's the word, aerobic. It's like you can get the whole thing with these ancient forms, and it was hard for me too. I feel it's hard to top experiences I've had on music. It's very comparable with surfing in that way to me. But like I was saying, on Friday I went surfing on a big day here in Jersey, and it gets big with these hurricane swells and whatnot. And I got my bell rung on a wave. Like I went under, and I thought I was near the surface, and I wasn't, and I was kind of clawing a bit. And when I came up, I breathed in a little water, and that for me was really great. Like
I'm like gasping for air just hearing the story, but glad you enjoyed it.
I don't need to be a lot more than that, but that was really kind of essential. That like there's like a little bit of danger, like a little bit of a risk of dying, even though it was
confirmation of the edge.
Yeah, it's minor, but your body doesn't know it's minor. Like your body's freaking out, and there's a way in which so I come back to the beach and I feel like head to toe alive in a way that I wouldn't have if I had just gone swimming at the Y or even swimming in the ocean. Right.
Yeah.
So there's we usually send this questionnaire before we have our guests on, and that you filled out your questionnaire, and there's like so many things that I want to dig into on your answers. But since we were just talking about like the relationship with the body and what it is that you experience when you go under and you feel like you're on that edge, one of the topics that you wanted to talk about is having a body, or the problem of having a body. What do you mean by that?
Well, one of the spiritual traditions I've been getting into lately is called Advaita, and it's an ancient Hindu tradition. Basically, it's non-duality. And the particular teacher I'm listening to is always saying the fundamental mistake we make is identifying with a body. Just having a body is a big pain in the ass. It gets sick. You have to keep it in shape. You feel like it has all these needs you've got to attend to. But fundamentally, the real problem of it is limiting your consciousness to this locus in the world, and thereby sort of failing to appreciate your connection to the whole. So if I don't identify with my body right now, I'm you, Bryce, and I'm you, Liz, and I'm the texture of the whole manifest reality, right? I'm not identifying with my body. I'm not taking care of it. I'm not worried about it. I don't have to. And that, ever since I've started to think about that, move away from identifying with my body in particular, I've started to see having a body as more straightforwardly just a problem. And the trick of getting out of it isn't suicide, and it's not drugs. It's just kind of a shift in consciousness, or through, sometimes for me, something like surfing, or a trance experience like listening to music, or there are ways around it, but you keep coming back to it. You keep having to, and as you get older, you have to maintenance it more. So my mornings are composed of taking care of the body, like I have an old car, that's like more and more problems. So
the warranty is worn out too. I tell you, right around 40,
I've got
expires.
A rotator cuff problem. I've got a hip problem. I've got to do all this rehab. I've got to do all this PT just to feel normal, just to feel, what's the word? Like
functional.
Functional. Yeah.
And Ram Dass has that thing where he would always say, like, this is a 1978 model. Like, you got to keep up with it, Yeah, and the fact that you said surfing too, again, and I knew we were going to just be drawing metaphors back and forth. Like, and if you want to speak to this a little bit more, you can. But it's just like, I know with music, there are points where I enter into a flow state, especially in performing, where it's like I'm not even of my body right now. Like I am, there's a connectivity to the crowd, there's a connectivity to the music and the rhythm that is like beyond me. And so it's almost like that escape from like being and into like experiencing. And I think that's does that speak to like what it is that you're speaking on?
Yeah, very much so. Like the flow state is really something that comes up a lot in surfing, but also in drugs. And the difference between the drug experience, the high, and the flow state is really interesting, because it's like what they see in addiction is like a lot of times your prefrontal cortex gets shut down, and this is the part of you that makes plans and has a kind of executive function, is like this but not that, and that's not a good idea, and has a sense of the future. And in the flow state, that also gets shut down a bit. But your capacity to moderate and modulate is not hampered. It's actually just increased. So you actually become, like, in an athletic context or in an artistic performance context, you're at your very best, right?
It's and not that has to do with reacting
to that has to do with reacting to everything that's coming in this kind of like really still, like it's like a state of grace, right? Same with surfing. And there are these certain activities that kick it into play, and I think that most of them have to do with the body. You know, like
yoga for me.
Going, and you put your mind in a trance, though.
Yeah.
The body can put the mind in a trance, and then the mind is free of its awareness of having a body, and then it's liberated.
That's so cool. That's exactly how I feel when I'm teaching and when I'm in a yoga class, like both as the teacher and as a student. And it's such a gift. And it's the antithesis of that is what you're saying is like the annoying thing about having a body. Like little kids sometimes can say that, put words to the thing that we just can't quite get to, because they just allow it to just be as simple as it is. And it was Glennon Doyle, who's a writer I really love. She talked about her daughter one day, was like upset, didn't want to go to sleep or something. And she said, "Mommy, I'm afraid I'm all alone in here." And she was like, "No, honey, you're not. I'm just in the other room." And she's like, "No, I'm in here. I'm all alone in here." And I remember reading that and just like having to stop, because it was just like my heart was just like like that moment of just like, yeah, that's how I feel. Like I'm all alone in here, and it's so real. Like so many of us are. And then that's why those moments when we do get into the flow, which we all, have access to, but sometimes just don't believe it. And you've got to, that not believing it, that lack of surrender is what keeps us from like, giving ourselves that gift. The moment you do get into it, you're not alone, and you're not losing yourself. You're just gaining that flow. You're gaining that, collective consciousness, I guess, for not a great way to say it, but it's, and it feels less lonely in a world where we often can feel so lonely.
Yeah, because I think if the mind is the source of the problem, if you could quiet the mind, then you return to a natural state of connectivity. The mind's activity, its neurosis, its hungers, its fantasies, it's all of its problems are the problem. So anything that can quiet the mind, and that's why drugs are so appealing, is you get a sort of release from the mind. And that was what my justification for drugs and alcohol for so many years. Like, I'm sensitive. I need a release. You tell me what's better than this. You tell me what's more reliable than this, and I'll do it. And I had a whole argument for justifying the continuation of it until it became obvious. It became straight up obvious that it was a dead end and it was basically suicide. And then I stopped and I pivoted. And what did I pivot to? I pivoted toward things that could help me do basically the same thing without being suicidal or self-destructive, right? Basically,
you could still have your need met.
Yeah, and the hunger for it is universal. It's universal. It's not just us. It's not sensitive people. It's not just addicts. It's universal. And some people's trauma makes them more hungry than others, though. I think that there's a greater desperation. And in the surf community, you see a lot of people coming into surfing as just like I did, out of some running from something in domestic life, usually. And the intensity of my concentration on surfing was predicated on or took its rise from the suffering I was feeling elsewhere. So I poured myself into surfing, and whatever natural ability I had was brought to its greatest fulfillment because I had that psychic need for the escape and the oblivion and also the reward of it, right? But it could have been drugs right away. Luckily, I had the privilege of living on the beach. It could have been a lot of other things for me.
Right.
But I was, yeah.
And so on this side, on the other side of active addiction and alcoholism and the activity, like, do you identify as a person in recovery? And what is your take on that?
Yeah, I like I say, because of the nature of my initial psychic surgery kind of come to Jesus thing, I never had an institutional connection to the discourse around recovery. So I didn't go to a program. I didn't go to rehab. I've never been in rehab. I've never been in AA for more than a few weeks at a time. Like I probably went to a total of 10 AA meetings. I never had a sponsor to speak of. I mean, I had this one guy who was useless. And so I've always just been on my own, and I've always been a bit skeptical of how other people talked about it. And I thought, well, maybe you're wrong. Maybe you should identify in that way because it'll be more likely to keep you sober. And then when I read about all the recidivism rates of all the various programs, I'm like, fuck that. Your very ability to stay sober, however you frame your sobriety, is the main thing. So if you do or do not think of yourself in a given way, it doesn't matter because the main thing is just to not be doing drugs and drinking.
Yeah. So, and I would like to challenge just a tad around, and this is a challenge in a way that, like, what I've come to discover recovery as being, because I am a member of 12-step program, and that was my foundation. But from that, I was able to branch out and see all the different multiple pathways of recovery. And I think, like, the stopping the drugs and the stopping the substances, like, is the very beginning. And like what this whole conversation has been talking about, like you getting into like different practices of like bodilessness, and you like discovering how like surfing is able to show up and allow for you to get into a flow state, and like this intentional tapping into what it is that makes us tick, self-actualization, figuring out like how to show up in context and how do we fit with spiders and snakes and mountains, and like all of this to me is recovery. Like that increasing, that ever increasing quality of life, whether it's with a program, whether it's on your own, whether it's with yoga, whether it's with music. Like recovery is a self-defined thing, and like that's for you to define what it is, you know. And so like that's my challenge. And what do you think when I say that?
Well, what I think about are the times where I would be in an AA meeting and coming out thinking like the emphasis has been on my being a drunk or like being an alcoholic, stories about being an alcoholic, identifying with other alcoholics, coming out of the meeting and going home. And I'd be thinking, but, you know, like left to my own devices, I actually don't think about it that much. I don't think about my being an addict that much. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's an eccentricity, but I always felt like the meetings were putting me into this identifying mindset where I was being asked to remember that I was an addict. And that was fine. But ultimately, I was thinking like, I have so much. I don't want to like, see, I'm wary of making some kind of self-deceptional mistake on this level. So it's almost like I don't even want to argue back because I don't want to make a special place for myself as better than or in some special status, because I just don't believe that. But all I'm trying to say is it hasn't been crucial to my sobriety to identify as anything other than just like I don't drink and do drugs. I'm sober.
Yeah.
And so when some people say, are you in recovery? I would say, yes, I have no issue with it, but it's not like I didn't come out of it. So it didn't form the way for you have like a lot of connections to it, and it's important in terms of your life.
I mean, and just for clarity's sake too, like I'm not saying, what I was saying is that like nobody has a monopoly on recovery. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like 12 step has been my foundation. And as I've continued, like I hit 9 years this year, and in that time, like the context to which that has been a contribution to my life has changed as well. And like the things that I do more has changed, you know, like we're dynamic beings. And so that dynamic essence requires a dynamic process. And such is the unfolding and the evolution of a person looking to live intentionally. And like, that's what I mean. When I share what I shared was that, no, like you belong just like anybody else who declares that they're in recovery belongs, no matter what it is that got them there, whether it be cooking or surfing or mountain climbing or hiking or biking or 12 step or yoga or meditation, whatever gets you into that process of living intentionally and showing up for yourself. Like that's the key is what I was saying.
Yeah.
And even when I say that, like, that's just one person's opinion. You know what I'm saying? This has just been my experience, and I in no way have a monopoly on anything, you know? And I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally, I find all that totally appealing. And yeah, that speaks to my experience totally.
Yeah, so
I'm so glad you asked that question, Bryce. I was actually thinking that too, because that wasn't a question that we asked necessarily as like to a conversation piece, but the way you defined yourself, that was interesting to me too. And I, just to throw my own experience into the bucket here, is I had similar experiences in 12 step that didn't appeal to me, and you know, felt you know, harmful in some ways for me personally on my journey. And that gave me a feeling of like, do I belong here and do I not belong here? And then the moment I decided, you know what, I get to decide if where I belong and how I want to call what I do and who I am. And, you know, I know at the Phoenix in particular, we're very intentional about our language around recovery, and like, you know, stigmatizing words like, you know, addict and, you know, junkie and things like that, because they can, you know, cause so much judgment. But at the same time, in the same breath, I will defend to the death anyone's right to call themselves whatever the heck they want, you know, to define their recovery, however they define it. Or if they, you know, if recovery is not the word that works for them, then cool. Like, it is just like, you are just so welcome here because you are you. And that's all we need. So we're so glad you're here.
Yeah. I mean, there's like all of this politics to these institutions.
So much.
There's so much of that. And, you know, in terms of the language of it, though, it doesn't really, I'm so much more conscious at this point of how approximate language is. And it's always gesturing in these ways. And there are all these spiritual traditions, and people have all of this experience on the inside of their consciousness, and the language is kind of gesturing at it. And it's easy to get caught up in the definitional sectarian stuff, like between forms of a world religion, you know, that I just sort of like, yeah, I don't have that much invested in it.
Yeah.
I
think that's very healthy. That's just,
definitely. And I
mean, one thing, I will say this though, the one thing I sometimes wonder whether I'm not missing out on, but maybe not doing my part in is sponsoring other people. Like, I'm not connected to a community. And my whole lone wolf thing, like my lone surfer dude, writer consciousness, I don't have anyone calling me up or asking me for, you know, like, I'm not asking. I'm not saying I don't
call that.
After
everybody.
this, I'm gonna get your number, and then we go. When I need somebody, I'm calling you.
This is just theoretical, but
I would say you are contributing deeply to.
And this is only occurring to me in the flow of this conversation. Because it's not like I wake up in the morning going, "Damn, I wish I had a sponsee."
Oh, that's so funny.
I don't think so. First and foremost, I don't think anybody thinks that. Like, I don't know. Maybe people like love it, but like for me, like my first inclination to like, can you work with me? It's like, no, I don't want to work with you. I got too much going on. And it's like, oh, practice the opposite. And that's why I lean in, and that's been a foundational development of like how it is that I show up for life. Because there's a lot of things that have taken my life to the next level that when I was asked to do it, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not sufficient to do that. I'm like, or you know, whatever it was that was my excuse. So that's kind of how that's fed into my life. But I would say even just by being on this show today, and with the stuff that you do with the Phoenix, and like you are a contribution to community for sure.
Hugely.
You belong.
Thank you for letting me off the hook, Bryce. I appreciate it.
You don't have to sponsor anybody. We'll take your phone number off of the show notes. You're safe.
I was close, boy. I'm glad we get to edit that out.
Well, look, Dad, I feel like this podcast episode could be like 3 hours because you are a very interesting individual. And I feel like the way your mind and spirit works, I feel like we could continue to mind roll for another hour and a half, 2-3 hours. But, in respect for your time, we do want to get to Liz's favorite special mega question. What you got for us, Liz?
So built up question. So Thad, if you could reach back in time and give a message, send some words to a previous version of yourself, knowing, like I always say, I have a kind of a typical way of saying this now, Bryce, that there's somebody out listening to this who is that previous version of you, likely, what would those words be today?
You're going to get to surf again.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Me,
I mean, that's just like paradise on earth, like that's the thing that I cut myself off from for some reason.
Yeah.
Thinking that it was incompatible with culture. In a lot of ways it is. But it's great.
And I think that's huge, like here at the Phoenix. That's why like we're delving into music like we are, because there's a lot of things where it's like, the culture that is not cohesive with what it is that I plan on doing moving forward. Or, when I stop the drugs, when I stop the alcohol, like the culture at sporting events, like that's just not cohesive to what it is that I'm looking to do. But it's like, no, as a matter of fact, it can be. As a matter of fact, there's a whole community of people that want to do it the same as you do, or want to go to concerts or want to go to sporting events and are completely sober and are having a great time, tapping in the flow state and all that good stuff. And I think that's what the Phoenix, like that's the biggest thing that the Phoenix has contributed to my life at the very least.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I have no hesitation about the availability of ecstatic states outside drugs and alcohol. Now it's like not even a question at all. I think when you're coming out of it, there is a lot of doubt about that though, because your body's been worn down and depleted, and a lot of your natural joy has been kind of burned up in the kind of, not only in neurological terms, but hormonally and physically, you're kind of wasted down. And so your ability to have a connection, to a natural connection, that has been compromised. And so it takes a while to just come out of that. And then you're like, oh, well, of course, right? This is,
I think what you just said is like one of the best seeds in this whole entire episode. Please, if you all are listening, rewind those last 3 minutes to hear what Thad just said, because this way of life, man, like living the availability of natural excitement and being able to tap into life and not needing something externally to really experience like these highs. They come with lows, but like I don't have to run away from the lows, which means that I don't have to run away from the highs. Like it's a very fulfilling experience. And nobody has a monopoly on what's right, but I know that it's been pretty cool for me. And so if you wanted to take part in it, like just know that it's available. The communities are here, the resources are here, and it's available. I was going to wait till after we stop rolling just because of like how we were doing on time to ask this question, but something's calling me to ask this question. What is intermittent reinforcement?
Oh yeah, sorry, that's the wonky part. That's this thing that was discovered about how you can condition an animal to focus on something. And so if you want to, like a rat or a dog or a person to do something, you reward them after they do it, right? They do the thing you want them to do. The dog does the little trick and you give the dog the treat, right? That's how you think of it as a natural reinforcement. But intermittent reinforcement is where you give the dog a treat and then sometimes you don't. And then you give the dog a treat and then you wait a few times, you have it do it. And the dog's like, well, what is it? Like, what am I supposed to do? What is the pattern here? What do I need to do to get that treat? And what they found out was that if you condition an animal to do something, it's most effective to reinforce the activity randomly. And that's completely counterintuitive, but that's the way a lot of drugs work. I go out on the street to buy drugs. Is there going to be a dealer? Is the drug going to be powerful? Am I going to be able to do it in the way I want to do it? All of that's up in the air. The reason why they think that this focuses us for there to be random reinforcement is because our brain is always looking for patterns. So, and if to go back into the ancient world, what's that rustle in the bush? Is it the wind or is it an animal? I got to figure it out because I have to hunt, I have to live. So my capacity as a brain is always to figure out the pattern. And if the pattern is irregular and random, what does that do to me? Does that make me give up? No, it intensifies my focus. So addiction, this is one of the reasons why harm reduction, like a morphine clinic, is more likely to give someone relief from addiction than street drugs. Because if you go to the pharmacy every day at 9 a.m., the high is not going to be as intense, and the addictiveness is not going to be intense if you're getting it at 9 a.m. The pattern there is straightforward. If you're going out on the street, and sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's weak, sometimes the guy shows up, sometimes he doesn't show up, your intensity, your consciousness is focused on the street drug, and that makes it more addictive.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to that kind of like drama piece that we talked about.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like the chaos. Yeah.
Right. That's right. That's a
part of what we're craving.
I never thought of it that way. That's so true. It's the edge. Yeah. And with surfing, on Friday there was surf, but all that week before there had been no surf. In fact, for 2 weeks there had been no surf worth my time. So I was like, when's it going to get good? When's it going to get good? The ocean is like randomly serving up good surf. I don't know when it's going to happen. What does that do to my interest level? It intensifies it. So the connection between surfing as a random reinforcement and drugs and addiction as randomly and reinforced is very strong. Because nature versus like a wave machine, if I could go to a gymnasium, that's why for me, like, surfing is so radically different, say, from playing basketball or playing tennis, because I can't even guarantee there's going to be a court in surfing. There's not even going to be maybe a way to surf tomorrow.
But you have constant FOMO, because if you don't go check, you might miss it.
Yeah, I can go to the gym. I can play basketball every day. So the intensity of my addiction to basketball is much less than to surfing.
So true.
That is
so interesting.
Something to keep everybody's head spinning as the way we.
I love what you did with that, Liz. Yeah, I like that thing about the drama, because I do think that there's a connection there. I never thought of it.
Full circle. Yeah. So interesting. Wow. We could go on forever and ever, amen, because this is just like one of the most fun conversations. But if you want to actually get a little more from Thad, you can, because Thad, you're coming on the Phoenix virtual platform, correct?
Right, yeah.
We're going to be, I believe it is the month of November, our book club that runs every Wednesday. I'm not going to say the time because I'm going to mess it up, and I know we have 1,000 different time zones out there, but it's Wednesday evenings. That you can find it on the app, you can find it on the website. It's run by one of our incredible instructors, Erica. She's going to be presenting Thad's book, and then Thad's going to make a guest appearance on one of those Wednesdays. So if you want to read the book, if you want to come to book club, if you want to meet the author, then you can sign up on the Phoenix app. Yay.
Beautiful.
So thank you for that.
Is
there any other? Our pleasure. Yeah. And is there any last little things you want to, like, any places you want folks to go to find you? We can just put things in the show notes. You don't have to think of everything right off the top of your head, but if there's anywhere folks should go that you want to shout out, feel free.
I'm super offline. I'm like barely there. So
good for you. Well,
as you should be with intermittent reinforcement. Like social media is like the biggest devil there.
That's actually, that's another good connection. Totally.
That is. That's a whole other podcast. Holy smokes.
All right, I'll keep running the board. All right, Liz, take us out. Dang.
All right. We did it, everybody. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Bryce. Thank you so much, Thad, for taking the time. This was such a fun convo. Thanks for everybody who is listening. Please, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe, whatever podcast platform you're on. If you'd be so kind as to rate and review, that helps people find us. And then this is a cool conversation. So please send it to a friend who you think would be interested. And we will see you next time.
See
See you
you.
next time. Peace.
So now you're excited. Bryce, Liz, how do I get involved with the Phoenix? Well, my friend, it is super simple. We actually have an app. Head over to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, or look in the show notes of this podcast, wherever you're listening to or watching this podcast, and go download the Phoenix app.
The Phoenix app makes it so easy to find classes that are near you or to access our virtual class schedule where you can hop on from the comfort of your home. You can also join our groups and have a conversation with someone from the Phoenix community from anywhere in the world. Please make sure that you join the podcast group where you can connect with Bryce and I and other listeners. Everything that you need is in the show notes. You can also head to our website at www.thephoenix.org. And maybe while you're there, you click the volunteer tab and get even more involved.